Good morning. Hope everyone's doing well, staying safe and healthy. Today we're going to continue our conversation on reading the Bible, more specifically, interpreting the Bible. When we're reading the Bible, in order to fully understand any given text, we must first acknowledge two questions. The first, what does it say? This deals with the then and there of the text. What does it say to the original audience? What did it mean to the original audience? And how did they respond? The second question we need to look at is, what does it mean specifically? This deals with the here and now of the text. What does it mean to us? How do we read it? How do we respond to it? But before we jump into today's topic on interpreting the Bible, we must never address the here and now without first addressing the then and there. Once we understand the expectations of the passage we're reading and its context, then we are able to answer the first question. What does it say? Okay, this is called biblical exegesis. We've gone over this. After we study and analyze or exegete the passage, then we can begin to interpret and apply its meaning. Interpreting and applying its meaning, this is called hermeneutics. Okay, new word, big word. Don't let it scare you though. So bear with me here. Faithful exegesis, analyzing the text, allows for faithful hermeneutics, applying the text, interpreting the text. And this is what we're going to talk about today. So what is hermeneutics? Before we begin interpreting the text, we must first define exactly what biblical hermeneutics is. Hermeneutics is the science and art of interpreting the Bible. That's it. That's all it is. The task of hermeneutics is to determine the meaning of the text so that accurate application can be made to us and to others. The Bible is no good to us if we can only read it, right? We must also know what it means, okay? We see this practice through the scribes of the Bible. In the Old Testament in particular, Nehemiah, chapter number 8, verses 1 through 18, we see this. Nehemiah is getting up to stand to read the scriptures, just as the scribes typically did in biblical times. But not only did Nehemiah need to read it, but Nehemiah also had to interpret the scriptures to allow his audience to understand what the scriptures were saying. This was very common back in the biblical times, Old Testament and New Testament. Scribes would interpret the text. Our goal in reading and studying the Bible shouldn't be simply to read the Bible, okay? It should be to understand and apply the words and teachings of the Bible. We not only need to read it, but we need to interpret and apply it. So why must we have good exegesis in particular? Well, because there's bad exegesis, right? Satan knows and can interpret Scripture. Just look at Luke chapter number 4, verses 9 through 12. We see that Satan takes Jesus at the top of the hill, the mountain, and he's quoting Scripture to Jesus, telling him, jump off, throw yourself from here, because it is written, he will command his angels concerning you to guard you. And on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone. These are two separate scriptures. Satan's taking them out of context and applying bad exegesis or bad hermeneutics from his bad exegesis, right? And then Jesus responds and says, no, you shall not put the Lord your God to test. He also applies his exegesis. This is another scripture that Jesus is quoting, but he applies it correctly. Satan is an example of bad hermeneutics, right? We don't need to fall into bad hermeneutics. It's one thing to be able to interpret the scripture. Satan could do that. But it's another thing to be able to interpret it correctly. That's what we're looking towards today. Bad hermeneutics can lead to a bad understanding of God and His holy word. So we must be careful. So how do we correctly interpret the meaning of a passage? Well, we should begin once again by exegeting the passage. We can't get its meaning without knowing what it says and why it says it. Once we do that, once we exegete the passage, interpretation will be a lot easier and it will be more accurate of an interpretation. Because in biblical interpretation, we do not create the meaning. Rather, we simply seek and discover the meaning of the passage that's already there. We don't create the meaning, we find the meaning, right? When we interpret and apply a text to the here and now, we must also apply what we learn through our exegesis of the text. We must apply the then and there before we can understand the here and now. If our hermeneutics of the text does not align with our exegesis, we should reevaluate our hermeneutics, right? They must align. They must be on the same page. We must take what we've learned about the text, about the then and there, and apply that to here and now. And these two goals and tasks, they should align with one another. Though there can be many different ways to apply the text, though, we must understand that the text can only be interpreted in one way. Okay? Listen to this carefully. If an individual's interpretation and understanding of a text is contrary to the rest of Scripture and what Scripture says, then that interpretation is wrong. Bad hermeneutics exists. We must be careful. Biblical interpretation is not subjective. We do not each have our own interpretation of what Scripture says. There's one interpretation of Scripture. We just need to know how to find it and successfully apply that interpretation. So in conclusion, this was a shorter one, but that's all right. They don't need to be super long, do they? When reading the Bible, in order to fully understand any given text, we must first acknowledge two questions. What does it say and why? This is exegesis. And the second question, what does it mean? How do we interpret and apply it? This is called hermeneutics. How do we interpret and apply the Scriptures? Once again, we should never address the here and now without first addressing the then and there. If one's exegesis and hermeneutics do not match up, that is dangerous. It can lead to bad bad understanding of God. We must use what we've learned about the text in order to interpret and apply it. Okay? Good exegesis allows for good hermeneutics. All right? So that was today's video. Short and sweet. Basically, if you know exegesis, you're going to know hermeneutics. It's going to be a little bit easier. So there's a lot of questions. How do we properly exegete and apply the text and interpret the text? Well, there's tons of different resources out there that you can get a hold of, and that's going to be another video looking at some resources to help you interpret, read, understand, interpret, apply the Bible. So that'll be next time. Hope this was a blessing to you. Hope we can continue this series and hope that you're learning something. I'm sure learning things as I'm continuing to make these videos. So hope this was a blessing to you once again, and I'll talk at you next time.